The Lowe Post.
Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast. It's late July. Nothing is going on. And one of the reasons nothing is going on, Tim MacMahon, is that we have these two contract/trade situations in the Western Conference. And this is going to be an all Western Conference podcast. We have enough of the East, enough Philly, enough Boston, enough New York that are these situations that are just in a holding pattern. The higher profile one, which you're all over, is Lauri Markkanen in Utah. I think every diehard NBA fan now knows August 6th is the first day that he can get raised up in salary and extended forward. That just happens to be exactly 6 months before the trade deadline in the 24-25 season, which means if he even takes one extra day to sign that extension, if he's not traded before then, by the way, which is theoretically possible, he cannot be traded during the upcoming NBA season. He will be a member of the Utah Jazz. Then, less heralded perhaps, is the Brandon Ingram situation. He's up for a massive extension. I haven't really heard much buzz that the Pelicans are psyched about giving him that massive of an extension. I also haven't heard much buzz, Tim MacMahon, about Brandon Ingram being traded anywhere imminently. I could be wrong. Sometimes I miss the buzz. Sometimes the buzz goes in other directions. But I'll tell you right now, it's hard as hell to build a Brandon Ingram trade in the Cooper Flag draft year. I can't find one. And there's sort of a holding pattern in these two situations. Let's start with Markkanen, because he would fit anywhere. We know the Warriors would be happy to get him at the right price. That would change theoretically the landscape of the Western Conference. I've mentioned the Spurs as a possibility. I do think the Spurs are interested. I don't know how interested, if they're willing to meet Danny Ainge's price. And the Rockets have been mentioned just because they have a million young players. We could go other directions, but what do we think is actually going to happen here and when?
Yeah. So my best educated guess is that Lauri Markkanen will not be traded this summer, that he will sign the extension after August 6th. He is not going to sign an extension on August 6th and live with being in constant trade rumors up until February 6th. He is not going to put himself in a position where he's going to have to deal with that. You know, as a married father with a young family that is happy in Utah, like Lauri's made it clear, he likes being in Utah. You know, he wants to be part of the future there. The Jazz front office, and, you know, obviously you always take things with a grain of salt, but the Jazz front office, Will Hardy, they've made it clear they love having Lauri Markkanen. Like, you know, kind of the messaging you hear out of Utah is, hey, Lauri Markkanen's not on the trade block. Like, we'll take calls, we'll listen, like, got to do your due diligence, but he's not, quote unquote, being shopped. He's not going to, it's not like, hey, whoever makes the best bid for Lauri Markkanen gets him. You know, you mentioned like the Warriors. Lauri Markkanen at the right price for the Warriors would be unbelievable. The right price for the Warriors ain't getting Lauri Markkanen. You know, it's like, you know, you like your house, right, Zach?
It's all right. Owning a home. What they don't tell you about owning a home in the movies, I guess they do in movies like The Money Pit, is just like,
it is a money pit.
Something is always going wrong. And you might be shocked to know, Tim MacMahon, that our listeners are surely going to be shocked to know, I can't fix anything. I have no handyman skills of any kind.
But your house isn't on the market.
No.
If somebody knocks on your door and makes you a ridiculous deal for a whole lot more than you bought the house for, would you potentially sell it?
Sure.
Okay.
Then I just got to buy another one or move somewhere or reorient my life, which is a huge, giant pain in the ass.
My point is Lauri Markkanen's not on the market. That doesn't mean that he won't get moved, but there's not been anything in all the conversations the Jazz have had. And obviously, you know, the Warriors have been out there. A lot of reporting on that. The Spurs are preliminary talks. The Kings, before they went the DeRozan direction, a lot of teams have called and checked in. There has been nothing even remotely tempting from the Jazz's perspective to this point. Again, my forecast, and obviously this is going to be a fluid situation, my forecast is he will end up getting that renegotiation and extension, getting the massive raise to where it'd be 40+ mil this year into an extension moving forward, and it'll be signed after August 7th, basically giving him a 1 year no trade clause.
So my best intel talking to people, and you just never know, right? But like all you can do is hear everything and do your best. Is that there will not be a trade this season, that he'll be on the Jazz this season. I don't know if that's true. I don't know what percentage wise that is, but if you ask me what I think is going to happen with Lauri Markkanen, whether he signs at the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 15th, I think the most likely scenario is he's on the Jazz. And yet I keep coming back to why does that nag at me as not as not as not a standalone thing that on its own makes a ton of sense. And the
Because
reason
the
is,
Jazz need to tank.
well, there's two reasons. Number one, they need to do something, and they can't do the same thing that they've been doing the last 2 years, where they're 500 and scrappy and feisty, and Will Hardy's coaching his ass off, and oh my god, blah blah blah, and then the front office pulls the rug out from under it halfway through, and you end up picking 9th, 10th, 11th, whatever they've ended up picking. Um, that's what's going to happen if they just bring back Lauri Markkanen and do nothing else. I just don't think that they want to do that. I don't care what the posturing is publicly. I don't care what you're saying. I think it's true of like, you've got to blow us away with this Mikal Bridges level offer to get Lauri Markkanen. I know Danny Ainge. I know how he operates. I think he wants to be in this draft and or the next draft at a high level. And I just don't think they can do that with just Lauri Markkanen. And I also don't think they can compete realistically for anything better than like maybe a low end playoff spot if they just bring back Lauri Markkanen, which is why I think it's interesting that they were reportedly in on Mikal Bridges before Mikal Bridges got traded to the Knicks. And I've been told in the last couple of days that like they were even more aggressively in for Mikal Bridges. And this is just according to a couple sources, who knows. But that was maybe reported, which makes me wonder just kind of what's going on here, because just bringing back Lauri Markkanen and not doing anything else, it doesn't pass the smell test to me. And I don't know what the other alternative is, though.
Yeah, and look, Danny Ainge at exit interviews last year said, "Hey, we're going big game hunting this summer." That doesn't mean they're going to catch anything, and obviously they have not. Whether it was Bridges and they talk about, oh, they were trying to go after Paul George. I mean, they're pie in the sky type of
Paul
situations.
George, that one was one of the ones where I was like, very few things make me do a pshaw, like just a pshaw. Like that one was like, yeah, Paul George is going to Utah. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sure that's in the. I'm sure he's going to take his meeting in Park City on June 30th.
But look, to your point, this thing where you're more competitive than probably anticipated, and then make the trade deadline pivot to dump some vets and go into a last third of the season tank, and you end up barely keeping your top 10 protected pick that you still owe Oklahoma City, by the way, which is a factor in all this thinking as well.
I always forget that one. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah,
That's the one pick that's out there that like my brain just doesn't register permanently that it exists.
Yeah, the Derek Favors salary dump. Ouch. Yeah, like the halfway or 2/3 of the way into the season tank thing, they're like that's a trend that's got to end. Now, you bring back this roster and look at the Western Conference. Tell me how many teams with Lauri on the roster is, we all agree, a very good player. How many teams are the Jazz realistically better than in the Western Conference?
It's a beast. It's a beast.
One is the answer. The Portland Trailblazers.
Could be just one. Could be, it could really just be one.
Yeah, and look,
it is just one. You're right.
And they have 6 players from the last 2 draft classes, right? 5 first-round picks, and Filipowski, who's a very, very early second-round pick. So 6 first-ish round picks. Plus Walker Kessler is still a developmental player. I mean, he played in the Salt Lake City Summer League. If they are giving those guys a lot of minutes, I don't know that you're going to have to worry about a pivot into a tank 2/3 of the way into the season. Look, they still have Colin Sexton. They still have Jordan Clarkson. I would say for now.
John Collins,
John Collins, who, that one, it was a weird fit to start. There's a reason they got him for literally nothing. He's a guy who puts up numbers, but it's just like he can't, him and Kessler can't be on the floor together. That whole thing was weird. Um,
He made sense with Olynyk. Olynyk now is gone, the
sure.
courtesy of the annual rip the rug out from under Will Hardy's team trade.
Yeah. And so my guess is the Jazz will trade at least one or two veterans during the season. All these young guys are going to get a ton of minutes, and they're going to, I think that Lowry will be on the roster and they'll still be a bottom two team in the Western Conference and, the top, whatever
Yeah,
half of the lottery.
that could put you sixth or seventh in the lottery. Being the second worst team in the Western Conference could put you, you're going to have all these teams in the East that are going to try to tank, jostling with you. And you're right. Maybe that's the way that they thread the needle. Keep Markkanen, offload Sexton, Collins, all these veterans who, like, they're not perfect players, but they sop up these regular season wins. Collins Sexton had 31 last night and they snuck out a win against the Pelicans. Like, that's going to happen a bunch of times. And yet, I don't like that's Lauri Markkanen's going to be psyched about that. Like, again, he's just in his prime going to be on a crap losing, tanking, rebuilding team. I don't
Well,
know. I don't
and
know.
that's that, he has made it very clear on the record repeatedly that he wants to be part of a winner in Utah. And again, something could change between now and August 7th and a trade could materialize, but that right now is not a likely scenario. Like, there would have to be a lot of ground covered in terms of any discussions that they've been having. But let's say he signs that thing August 7th again. He gets his massive raise, he gets his long-term security, he gets a 1 year no trade exception. His wife and young kids don't have to worry about being uprooted in the middle of the season. The Jazz and Markkanen can kind of mutually evaluate the situation over the next year, know where they land in the lottery, and then kind of be able to look at the situation together and figure out, hey, can Lowry, who at that point is going to be still pretty early in his prime, realistically be, are the timelines going to be realistically aligned or not? That's a decision you can make a year from now. They don't have to make the decision now. And what they're telling Lowry is, you're not being shopped. We want you to be here. That's our preference as well. And, for that reason, my understanding is the Jazz are not going to try to play hardball on sign this extension on the 6th. We need you to sign it now because, they don't want him going into the season feeling like, dude, all they're trying to do is trade me. I'm a human trade chip for the next few months. So, I think all the reasons you laid out to be skeptical are absolutely legitimate, but I don't think there's a sense of urgency in terms of we've got to figure this out over the next 2 weeks.
Someone smart within the league pitched this one to me. I don't love it, but it's an interesting thought. So the Pelicans have this Ingram situation hanging over their heads. They acquired DeJounte Murray in a rather large trade.
Yep.
They have too many guys who need the ball. Like, you just can't have DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, all these dudes playing together, competing for minutes. It's too similar. They don't have any. I mean, they have Daniel Tice and the kid they drafted, Misi, at center. They don't have any experienced big man anymore. It's rare that we get to July 26th and there is a objectively good team with a superstar in his prime or entering his prime in Zion Williamson. That is so clearly half done, half baked, like has major moves still left to make. And this person said to me, this person's smart and he knows stuff and he figures things out, puts pieces together all the time. So is it possible that the Pelicans are already have something that they think is lined up that is contingent on what happens with Markkanen? And I said, well, that's interesting because, like, what if what happens with Markkanen is they just sign him and he's not traded? Like, what's the move? And he said, well, would the Jazz ever trade for Brandon Ingram and build around Ingram and Markkanen and sort of, because I don't think you're going to have, and I said, I immediately recoiled, like, ugh, that's just like a mediocre team. Like, what's the point of that? And he got that. And then he said to me, Well, given like the Ingram trade market right now, the Jazz would still have a gazillion picks left. You're not going to have to fork over a ton of great future draft picks to get Brandon Ingram. You're just going to have to give them some players that clarify the Pelicans roster. I thought that was an interesting idea, given that they went after Bridges. I don't love it, but it is weird that the we're almost in August and there's just not even like a lot of noise about what the Pelicans are going to do with this team. I don't remember a situation quite like this.
Honestly, the only thing that I had heard about Ingram uh, was this is before Sacramento got DeRozan, some sort of three-way thing where he landed in Sacramento and Jared Allen landed in New Orleans. And Kenny Atkinson has made it very clear.
I
And
don't think the Cavs had any interest in that before Kenny Atkinson, to be honest with you.
yeah, well, again, that one isn't happening. It sounds like Jared Allen's not going anywhere. Um, I think that the ideal scenario for the Pelicans would be to turn Brandon Ingram into a quality starting center, but easier said than done. And the market's very chilly on Brandon Ingram because, for the same reason, or at least some of the same reasons, as the Pelicans don't see him as part of their long-term plans. Like he's a good player, but teams aren't eager to line up and pay him anything close to max type of money, and he wants that kind of money, and that's just going to be tough. And he's a good player who's not he like Markkanen, you mentioned, can fit with anybody. Ingram is a little bit different. Like you said, he needs the ball in his hands. He's not a floor spacing uh, type of guy. I I'm same as you. I can't find any kind of buzz on a realistic Ingram trade right now, and I think it's going to be difficult for the Pelicans.
So Ingram is a very good player. I've always had kind of a soft spot for him, but I've often said that you look at his numbers and they're just these like superstar numbers, like 25, 5, and 5. And you watch the Pelicans play, and it's just like he doesn't feel like that good of a player. Something is
Yeah,
lost in translation between the numbers and the impact on winning. Part of it is that he's like a B minus, B plus passer, not a great passer, but a good passer. Part of it is that he just has never been as good a defender as he should be given his physical tools. I know he's skinny, but he's very, very long, obviously. And part of it is that he just doesn't take threes, just does not take enough
right.
threes. The Pelicans were on him for years to take more threes, more threes, more threes, shoot quickly off the catch. He just does not want to do that. I do think so. So you do face this question of like, am I going to pay $50 million a year, a max salary for a guy who's the second or third best player on a great team? That's a tough choice. I do think he's getting a little bit of a raw deal based on his life in the torture chamber in the first round of the
I was going to
playoffs
say
last
that.
year.
Yeah, the
Coming,
last look we got was a tough look, but you also got to give Lou Dort a lot of credit.
got to give Lou Dort a lot of credit. You got to acknowledge that Ingram was coming right off an injury, like fresh off an injury and a lot of time off. And like, that's not easy to do. And you also should acknowledge that in his previous foray into the playoffs against the Suns in 2022, he had a really good series and looked like, oh my God, this guy's kind of a playoff killer making these mid-range jumpers. I just go through the teams. I'm like, well, Atlanta just made a trade with the Pelicans and didn't get Brandon Ingram.
Yeah,
Charlotte has Brandon Miller and kind of has taken the long view. Sacramento just pulled themselves out of it. The Bulls, I don't really see it. The Warriors as like a marketing alternative. Team USA, Steve Kerr, that went horribly with Brandon Ingram for all the reasons I just said about his game. He's just not a great fit with the Warriors system. And all the other teams are like, why are we adding 5 extra wins to our ledger when all we're trying to do is be bad? Like Brooklyn. Okay, well, like all these, which makes me, which actually made this guy's thought about Utah 5% more plausible to me. If I were the Jazz, I just don't, I wouldn't do it. But that's just me.
I wouldn't do it either because I think it's like it's time for Utah to fall out of the kind of purgatory state of being stuck in the middle and then trying to sink closer to the bottom towards the end of the season. Um, obviously the other risk for a franchise like Utah's, you make a trade for this guy and he's a free agent. There's no guarantee that he stays. Now the flip side of that is, well, if his trade value is limited because nobody wants to pay him, then his, you know, um,
You do that's the kind of wink wink research you get done before making a trade. I'm sure it's the kind of research that was done when they were looking into Mikal Bridges too. And Mikal Bridges is now
yeah,
plays for the New York Knicks with his entire college team.
Well, and it's the kind of thing that you could say about an Indiana as well. And they did their research with Pascal Siakam, and obviously that worked out well. So,
Well, it's just interesting because the Pelicans are just half baked, and the Jazz have all this cap space that they have to use because of the salary floor, and all these teams are there are degrees of interest in Lauri Markkanen. Houston is an interesting one to me because I've just been of the view that like if I'm the Rockets, I just need to let this thing marinate. I'm not rushing. I just don't know enough about my team and how it all fits together and what all these players can do. And yes, I've got some contract deadlines coming up with Alperen Şengün and Jalen Green, and those negotiations I think are going to get kind of spicy maybe in a couple of cases if and when they actually happen. Um, but I know Ime Udoka and the coaching staff, like they want to win. They want to hit the gas
mhm.
now, and Markkanen would be a way to hit the gas. But I don't know. I just want to see more from the young guys. But they're clearly an interesting thing. They have seven really interesting prospects now. If Tari Eason can come back healthy from his injuries last year,
Yeah, and they're not all going to be there long term. I mean,
can't be.
you do, yeah, just do the finances. Um, and the fact that there is it's been slow on the negotiation talks with Boshingun and Green is interesting. I would be surprised if either of those get done before the season. I mean, I guess there's risk involved with restricted free agency in terms of souring relationships or you're matching a shorter deal like what happened with Utah with Hayward and that kind of thing. But I've said it many times and people haven't necessarily been thrilled with it, but I don't expect both Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün to be part of the long-term picture in Houston. I think it's maybe one or the other, but it's not going to be both.
Şengün had when there was even a whiff of Şengün's availability on the market. And I don't know if he was ever really available at all, but like there were some teams that were really, really interested to get into that bidding. Okay. I wanted to bring you on to we're doing some Western Conference previews today of teams that not that they haven't been talked about a lot, but so much of the focus has been on Clay, the Clippers, always
Mhm.
the Lakers. Should we start printing the Jeremy Grant Lakers jerseys, by the way? Should we just do it now?
I'm sure you can find Photoshops. You can find Photoshops probably every single decent player in the league in a Lakers uniform.
I might order one. So let's talk about some West teams that didn't do anything that exciting, but are still worth talking about. Now, I wanted to talk to you about the Phoenix Suns. Disappointing year last year, got mauled in the first round by the Minnesota Timberwolves in the 3-6 series. Uh, Brought back Grayson Allen. We'll have the same, presumably, maybe the same starting five: Grayson Allen, Brad Beal, Booker, Durant, Nurkic. Brought back Royce O'Neal on a nice contract. I think that's a nice move. Brought in Monty Morris, valuable backup point guard, valuable and yet hasn't played meaningful playoff minutes in a little while. Brought in Mason Plumlee to replace Drew Eubanks. I think that's probably an upgrade at backup center. And that is the end of the I'm sure you're going to be in the rotation portion of the Phoenix Suns. Um, and look, you can spin it a lot of ways, right? If they were just healthy for longer, Beal, Durant, and Booker played 41 games together in the regular season, I think. So here's the numbers on them. In the regular season, they were plus 6.5 per 100 possessions with those three on the floor. That's like good. It's
Yeah,
not
that's good.
it's not crazy. The offense was awesome and the defense was bad. They were a total of plus 127. In the playoffs, they were minus 51 in 125 minutes.
I think that's pretty bad.
If you add it all
Pretty
up,
bad.
which I will do, in almost 1,000 minutes with those three on the floor, the Suns were a piddling, I say, plus 76. Like, that's
Yeah.
just not good enough when all your best players are on the floor.
Well,
And
that's not good enough for three max guys.
no, and I just look at the team and like you can spin it optimistically, like they'll be healthier, more continuity. Yeah, Durant's dealing with a calf injury now, whatever. More
Yeah.
continuity. Bench might be a little bit better. Like, I didn't like there are okay guys beyond the eight that I mentioned. Damian Lee, Josh Okogie, who was signed on this KJ Martin style, like this is
Yeah.
we're signing you to trade you, but enjoy the money. Nasir Little, I've always had a soft spot for. He never seems to play when it matters. Bol, I don't trust as far as I could throw him in a big game. I just, what's the roadmap here to like a viable defense? What's the roadmap to being a good rebounding team? What's the road? It's hard for me to get excited about the Suns. Can you excite me?
I'm not going to sit here and blow smoke up your butt about the Suns. I'm not going to sit here and justify why I think they are, 26 to 29 teams would eagerly swap spots with them. By the way, on the annual NBA.com GM poll, they've got to include that question.
Would you swap rosters with the Suns?
Yeah, rosters and situations. I think it'll be fewer than 26 would take.
Before you continue, I am derelict to mention the biggest change the Suns made in the offseason was hiring Mike Budenholzer
Yes.
as their head coach. I don't know what that's going to mean for them. I know that when it mattered against the Minnesota Timberwolves in the playoffs, they had periods of 3 or 4 minutes when they were running like a really functional NBA offense, when their best players were playing off of each other in sets that made sense, when they were hunting the right mismatches, when they were doing the stuff that you think they would do with these three guys. And then there would be 10 minutes where they would look like they had never played basketball together before, and they would hunt all the wrong matchups. They would overlook all the right matchups, and Kevin Durant would stand in the corner doing nothing, and then Devin Booker would stand in the corner doing nothing. And it was like, I get that you can chalk that up to continuity. They did play 41 games together. Like, it's not like they played 10. It's not like they're the Olympic team.
Well, and that's where I have a tough time generating excitement is because like they should have been getting better as they went. And obviously you would prefer they would have gotten more time together. But guess what? Like you've got three guys who have pretty significant injury histories, two especially, and those two are into their 30s. Like to expect Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant to be healthier, like based on what? On hope, sure, but that's not based on like, science or probability. Not that I know how to calculate either of those things, but I just don't think it is. And like Frank Vogel, he got the blame. Okay, fine. But Frank Vogel knows how to coach. He's a championship coach. He did manage to cobble together a slightly above average defense in Phoenix. So, I mean, that's pretty impressive. Look, maybe Budenholzer comes in and clearly there was a lack of buy-in with Vogel, certainly, as the season went on. Maybe there's buy-in with Budenholzer. Maybe that changes things, but I just to pin this all on a veteran proven coach and say, well, bad hire, he's gone, bringing in Bud, everything's going to be fine. I don't know, man. I don't see that. And maybe if it was a competitive series against the Wolves, you might feel a little bit differently, but they basically got their butts whooped.
They did indeed. And it ended poorly. It started poorly. They got destroyed. And look, I mean, again, they won 49 games despite having their full roster for half, their full star roster for half of it. Like, this is a good team. I don't mean like if you told me they're once again in the top 6 in the West, which that sounds like a low bar, we're going to have to learn that top 6 in the West is not a low bar. Not when you have Denver, Minnesota, Dallas, Oklahoma City, lording over 4 of those spots, most likely with good health. I wouldn't be surprised by that. You tell me that it's 2-2 in the first round against one of those teams because Durant and Booker do what they did when it was 2-2 against the Nuggets in the conference semifinals 2 years ago when they won more games off the Nuggets than any team in the playoffs. Sure. It just doesn't. I don't look at the roster and feel confident that there's a roadmap to something more than that, barring a really unexpected mega bounce back from Bradley Beal and Durant maintaining his MVP level play from his best stretches of last season. Bud is as good a defensive coach, if not better, than he is an offensive coach. He is a regular season wins machine. He's a championship coach. I'm very curious to see how he wrings a top 10 level defense out of this roster because I just don't think you can do it.
I think they were ranked 13th last year.
which was amazing.
Yeah, and I think that was Vogel really doing a good job on the defensive end of the floor with that group. And I agree with you. Like, hey, are they probably a playoff team? Yeah. Can they get out of the first round? It's hard to see that path in the West.
And if that's just what you settle, it's too early for this because we have to see how the season plays out. There's going to be trades. People are going to get hurt in different places. We just don't know how it's going to go. But if that ends up being just what the team is, I don't even know what that means. Like Bradley Beal has 50 million, 54 million, 57 million on a player option, untradeable. Devin Booker's the franchise player. Durant, I think, is extension eligible this summer. I should have checked with Bobby Marks before. It says extension eligible on Spot Track right here. 52, 55, and then he's an unrestricted free agent after 25, 26. I don't know, man. If this just amounts to that, woo.
It's a very expensive first round team. And you know what? I don't want to necessarily just say, oh, because the West is so good. Because hey, would you pick them to beat Boston, New York, Philly, Milwaukee? Like I
Can
don't
I
think
just say something about Philly? I have been captain of the I say it every 10th podcast. Paul George is a boss. I love Paul George. I have even kind of tried to just ignore his putrid playoff performances in the bubble and his not so great playoff performance last season against Dallas, which he never talks about on Podcast P, talking about how now the Clippers are the B team, by the way. After you went there, if the Clippers are the B team, don't you bear a little responsibility for the Clippers being the B team? I guess they're always going to be the B team. It doesn't matter. But anyway,
they didn't make the Clippers. I mean, the Clippers Paul George choir was a failure based on the
look.
expectation.
Here's all I'm saying. Now. Okay,
Go on, it's your podcast. Go on a rant.
that's not a rant. Like I love Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid is a two-time guest of the Lowe Post podcast. He is the only player in the NBA I think that I use the word majestic about. He is a majestic basketball player on both ends of the floor. He gets better every single year. I think I'm just ready for those two to just kind of take a powder for the summer and stop talking about like almost anything because you're going to start making people root against the Sixers with every comment about how I'd be in the GOAT conversation if I were healthy and the Clippers are the B team. And I thought it was cool that Paul George detailed his contract negotiations publicly. Yeah. I love that. And he did so accurately. I don't know. I want to like this team. And because I want to like this team and I love Philly, I've said many times on this podcast, Philly is the most underrated city in America. And I just kind of just let it just take a little break to go on, go play in the Olympics. Paul, like put the podcast on hiatus for the summer. Like, let's dial it back a little bit.
I'm never, ever going to discourage an NBA player from flapping his gums in the media. That's bad for business, Zach.
Yeah, I guess. We're okay. Let's go back to this.
If they want to flap, we're willing to listen.
No, okay. So to your point, I'm not taking the Suns over any of those teams in the East that you mentioned. And I guess that's really all I have to say about.
So like the Suns are, somewhere probably between the 10th and 15th best team in the league, which there's no shame in that, except for the fact that they are unbelievably expensive with two aging stars and have pushed all their draft capital into the middle of the table. Like, look, all you need to know is the Rockets said, yeah, we would rather have the Suns' future draft capital than the Nets.
I'm glad you.
By the way, that was a deal that the Rockets approached the Nets about before the trade deadline, and then the Nets saying, "Okay, we do need to go into a rebuild. Let's revisit this with the Rockets, and if they're still cool with that, we'll do the Mikal Bridges deal."
I'm glad you brought that up because I was in a meeting with an agent yesterday, and we were talking about this exact thing. And remember when that happened as part of the Mikal Bridges deal, Woj tweeted about Durant and how the Rockets would love to make a run at Durant. And the Suns pushed back aggressively being like, we're not making Durant available. Durant's never going to be available, blah, 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 which is what you should do if you're the Suns. And I think was also
Sure.
honest. I don't think they wanted to trade Durant. I don't think they want to trade Durant. I think Durant was never available. And then the story kind of died and we went on to the Knicks. Oh my God, the Nets are tanking. The New York teams traded with each other. Can you name a single Brooklyn Net? All of this. And this agent brought me back to it. And he said to me, I think the Rockets really wanted Kevin Durant. Like I
Well,
think that part of it was true. I think they would have offered
well,
a lot of stuff for Kevin Durant.
and again, I don't think that's a consensus within the organization. Which look, and I'm not saying like it's some kind of dysfunction within the Rockets organization. I'm just saying in most organizations, you're going to have varying viewpoints. And, there's definitely those within the Rockets organization that are like, look, we've got a ton of young talent. We're well positioned with all these picks. We took a step last year. Let's try to put something together that can be a contender for as long of a window as possible versus hey, right now, let's go. Come on, KD. We get KD now. We got a
You're
chance.
right. I shouldn't have said that they wanted Durant as if they were a monolith. But
Right,
some
right.
contingent.
Sure.
I think there was reality to that part of the Durant
Well, I don't
Phoenix
think there's
Houston
any
thing.
secret that Ime Udoka wants to win as much as possible right now. Like he is, I don't know if patience is his best virtue. And look, his first year as a coach, he coached in the NBA Finals. He knows he can coach deep into the playoffs. He's that kind of a coach. I don't think it's a bad thing that he wants to be that aggressive, but there's a reason that the old coach GM thing seems to be a thing of the past.
All right. Last question. I'm forcing everyone to do this. By the way, speaking of teams where there may be some disagreement within the ranks, Adam Morris is coming on to talk about the Denver Nuggets in a few minutes. All right. So this is the question I'm polling everyone on that I see. Everyone I talk to, everyone I meet with, everyone, all this stuff. Markkanen's unresolved. Ingram's unresolved. The West right now, as of right now, Tim MacMahon, I'm making you do it. You have to pick a team to come out of the West and make the finals. Who are you picking?
Well, I'm out of the predictions business.
I'm
But
making you do it anyway. This isn't the Hoop Collective.
what I will do is say that I recognize that after the moves that they made, the Oklahoma City Thunder will go into next season as the favorites. And I believe that is what should be. And look, in the Western Conference playoffs, Thunder gave the Mavericks the toughest series, right? And
That SGA foul in the left corner,
yeah,
at the
which
end of Game 6 was a foul. It was a foul.
yeah, and look, the Mavericks won that series. There were two major reasons, in my view, the Mavericks won that series. One, PJ Washington had a phenomenal series and had the best maybe the best shooting stretch of his life. Just the game plan was let's get the ball out of the hands of Luke and Kyrie as much as possible. We'll let PJ get some open looks. He torched him with it. Two, Derek Lively II, who, again, there are three stud centers coming off the rookie year on I-35. Derek Lively II. He's not Wemby. He might not be Chet, but he kicked Chet's ass especially in the second half of Game 6. And, so the Thunder, I'd already heard rumblings about the Thunder wanting to get Hartenstein. I heard it as early as the first round of the playoffs. But what happened, especially in Game 6 of that series, just kind of reinforced, hey, having that much of a rebounding flaw is something that needs to be addressed. And so the Thunder, they went out and addressed that weakness. And then, added Caruso, which I still cannot believe they didn't have to give up a draft pick, not even a second round pick, when they've got the largest stockpile in the history of mankind. I mean, wow. Anyways, and you're talking about literally the youngest number one seed in NBA history. Look, I think they will grow from that series. So while I think the Mavericks, the defending Western Conference champions, got better this summer, I think that the Thunder got more better, better
I like
early.
that. I like that. That sounds like something you get at the Derek Zoolander School for kids who can't read good, um,
Yes.
or whatever it's called. So the reason I've enjoyed asking people this question is because a year ago, right now, everyone would have just defaulted to Denver, even after Bruce
Yep.
Brown left. So it's Denver, like Denver. It's Denver's conference until someone proves otherwise.
I mean, they'd have said that going into Game 7 against Minnesota.
And in this offseason, Denver's taken a lot of flack. I'm going to talk about them in a second for losing KCP on top of losing Bruce Brown. Um, Dallas, people, the consensus is they got better, but how much better and what does it mean for their defense? And their run
Yeah.
to the finals was kind of a surprise to begin with. Can they really repeat that? The Clippers are obviously gone. And Oklahoma City's young. I would say 20. I wrote about this today. 25% of the people I ask immediately say Oklahoma City. Like the people who
Yeah.
are certain and confident in their pick say Oklahoma City. The rest go to open their mouths as if they're gonna do a repeat of like how confident they were last season in Denver, and they begin to say something like, "Wait, Dallas." I just said the thing about Dallas, Denver, KCP. And you get this internal monologue like Minnesota, like
I mean, yeah,
why
you got
isn't
to
it?
throw Minnesota
Why
in there
isn't
too.
it? And you hear them say like, why isn't it Minnesota? Like, why? What is it about them that I don't quite trust? But shouldn't it be them? They have Anthony Edwards, and then you get down to like, oh, just like, are the Lakers going to make a trade? Like, do I have to mention the Lakers, the Warriors? And then some of them go to the Thunder, and then some of them are like, maybe it's just Denver again. It's just been interesting to
Yeah.
hear people's different internal monologues in response to a question that had like a pretty universal answer a year ago. I think right now I would default to Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right, Tim MacMahon. Enjoy the Olympics opening ceremonies. You can do anything for opening ceremonies. Do you have a little like ceremony at your house? I'm thinking about getting all my international friends in the neighborhood together and having our own little opening ceremony where we carry flags.
I don't have any international friends, but honestly, I don't have any American friends either. So I'll probably just ride solo.
Tim MacMahon, thank you for all your time on the pod. Enjoy the Olympics. Enjoy a little downtime, hopefully. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate you, brother. Enjoy your European vacation and adios, amigos.
All right. Speaking of I almost called them the defending champions. They're not anymore. Denver Nuggets. Adam Morris of DNVR Sports. There's no one I'd rather talk about the Nuggets with. I wrote about them today. I think their position in the discourse about the Western Conference has turned very interesting since they let KCP go in free agency or KCP left in free agency. They've taken a lot of crap, as you know, for being cheap, for being overly worried about the second apron. I think that crap is like 50%, 60%, 70% fair. Like the second apron is a real thing. The concerns are real. But they did have a championship level team. It was a proven championship level team. KCP did not have a good playoffs. Got bullied against Minnesota. His 3-point volume, which is a crisis now for the team, fell to almost career low levels. And Denver is betting big on the youth brigade led by Christian Brown and Julian Strawther and Peyton Watson and maybe some other guys to replace his minutes. And Russell Westbrook is probably coming, probably as soon as today, on what I've heard is going to be a 1+1 with the player option. A strange offseason, given that the fifth cog in the best starting five in the NBA left. He's being replaced by objectively worse shooters almost across the board, other than Strawther, who we'll see how much he plays. I have very high hopes for him. And now, backup point guard, you can always find a Monte Morris, your old friend. You can always find, like, a Chris Dunn, a Reggie Jackson, who they signed and then salary dumped with a bunch of second-round picks and then brought in Dario Saric for some reason at the same amount. And I like Dario Saric fine, but I don't know what the bidding war was for him. And instead of bringing in a traditional calming presence at backup point guard, they bring in the most frenetic, and sometimes it's good freneticism, sometimes it's destructive freneticism, an unusual presence, and maybe the worst high volume 3-point shooter in the history of the NBA in Russell Westbrook. And it has left both NBA experts and I'm guessing Denver fans a little unsettled. Like, wait, what just happened? KCP, like what's going on? So I put it to you. What is going on? How do you feel about the team?
Yeah. Well, first of all, so much of how you feel about the team right now depends on how you feel about how their season ended and why. And I think you started it. I like the way you started it. First of all, talking about, are they still defending champ caliber team? And last year they won a franchise record 57. I actually think that last year's season is hard to analyze because the team was clearly exhausted and Jamal Murray was clearly unhealthy and not in playoff shape for it. And if you take away that piece of it, all other things, are secondary to that. With losing KCP, that is a big piece because he completed the roster. He was a two-way player. He completed that starting lineup in ways that the starting lineup was great before he got there, but they went to another gear with him. And now the question is, okay, how much of that was what he's capable of doing? I love that you brought up the playoffs because 2 years in a row, last year it was Devin Booker. If you remember, Devin Booker was shooting 80% with KCP guarding him through five games. Before turning an ankle, and then Denver obviously winning that one. And then last year against Anthony Edwards, he made no impact on him. So I think Calvin
He's
Booth,
too small for Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards is a monster.
And that's the thing is in the West, you want to have guys to guard all different types of positions. You want to have a lot of guys in your stable. I thought last year Michael Malone probably should have gone away from KCP earlier in that series and did not. And I think Denver looks at that and says, okay, can we afford to go into the second apron and all of the things that costs you? If we have a guy that's good against, maybe a little bit more than half of the teams that we're going to have to face to win a championship or to get out of the Western Conference. So with me, I understand some of the decisions that Denver made, but to your point, Westbrook is such an enormous wild card. And when you list off three guys and then say there's possibly more who are more or less unproven as championship pieces, Strother, Peyton Watson, maybe even Zeke Naji, that's when I think you start to get into the territory of, okay, that's a lot of ifs for Denver to overcome.
Let's just go through the rotation first. The starting lineup is going to be Murray, probably Christian Brown, although Calvin Booth, I talked to him this week, kind of opened the door for this could end up being a competition that Christian's got to win in camp between Peyton Watson if they want to go big. I don't think that's going to be in the cards. Or Strother, who I think I might like Strother too much. I'm very excited about Julian Strother. And then obviously MPJ, Aaron Gordon, and Nikola Jokic. Rock solid. Like that lineup's going to be awesome. Any lineup with Jokic is going to be awesome. No matter who it is going to be awesome. Now the shooting quotient is going to go down, and we're going to talk about that. The bench, let's just say Brown starts for the ease of analysis. I think we know four guys who are almost certainly going to get minutes are Russ, assuming the signing gets done today or soon. Strother, Watson, Saric. That's 9. I haven't reached too deeply into my bag of other young guys like Pickett and Tyson who are complete unknowns. No Naji yet, and I can stagger minutes in various ways. Now I've got to make a decision like, can I play Russ, Jamal Murray, and Strother all together? Is that like a realistic thing? Maybe against backup units it is. It's an interesting rotation. And well, as we go through it, like what are the if you are a little less confident in the team, and I'm not sure that you are, than you were at the end of last season, when I agree with you, like for all the fretting about the Nuggets right now, this team was A, gassed, B, a little bit injured. So was Minnesota, by the way. Mike Conley missed a game in that series. Gobert wasn't injured, but he missed a game in that series. They were up 20 in game 7 at home against the team in their conference that they were most scared of. They hold on to that game. They would have been favorites in the next round. Now they go against Boston in the finals. That's a titanic matchup, but Boston had a healthy respect for them. They swept that series. Like, I think Denver is closer to still being, and I think they are still an inner circle championship team, but let's just posit that you and I, Denver optimists as we have been, maybe a little shaken in our faith in the team. What, as you go through that rotation, what parts of it, what subsets of the game are interesting potential spots that need to get better or you're curious about?
Well, first of all, the reason we're a little more concerned is because there's more variables than ever before. Some of these, there's more wild cards than ever before, more ifs. But first of all, let's start with the starting shooting guard spot. I understand why you would say it's an open competition. You kind of have to say that. You want guys to earn it. You don't want to ever just ordain things from above before you get there, especially with young guys. But it has to be Christian Brown. If you started Julian Strother, the Denver already has a lack of shooting. In the bench, the biggest question is going to be if you're going to play Russell Westbrook in your bench minutes, well, you need to have shooting around. If Julian Strother is starting and Michael Porter is starting and Jamal Murray is starting, who's left to shoot the ball off of the bench? So I think for starters, I just don't buy that this is going to be a real competition, because logically it doesn't seem to make sense to me that it would be anybody other than Christian. The Peyton theory is interesting because it could work. But I doubt that happens. So start with that. And then you go to the bench and you say, okay, I like Dario Saric because he does give you the ability to play something like you do with Nikola Jokic with however you stagger your lineups. But does Russell Westbrook change all of that? Does it take the ball out of Saric's hands? Is he no longer the fulcrum? Those two things almost seem like separate ideas. Saric gives you continuity of style between starters and bench. Westbrook completely disrupts it. So now you have the harmony there. And then my bigger concern is I really like Peyton Watson and his development and his upside as a player. But what he is not is a guy that you send to the corner and tell him to spot up from the 3-point line. If Westbrook has the ball, Dario Saric is a fulcrum. What other role is there for him to be other than spacing the floor? He's not a floor spacer. So I worry that there's going to be some diminishing returns on his offensive skill set with the second unit as well.
So I think this is, I wanted to talk to you about this more than anyone. Save maybe Kevin Pelton, because he can nerd out on the numbers that I can't research. This team was dead last in 3-point attempt rate last season. 30th. After being 22nd, I believe, the year they won the title. It's hard in the modern NBA to win 4 playoff series when you're just facing a math problem every single game. And they are a bad free throw generation team, so it's not like they're getting a ton of extra points there. And their roster changes, unless Strother comes out and is just taking like 10 threes per 36 minutes, which maybe he does. Their roster changes from KCP to Brown in the starting 5, bringing in Russ off the bench. Now, they can sit here and tell me Russ is going to generate threes. That's why he's here. He's here to push the pace, kick it out to Saric, play fast with Jokic, and inject some unpredictability, drive and kick and all that. He's not a 3-point shooter. Saric is a low-volume 3-point shooter. And what I went back and forth with Pelton, and I talked to Calvin Booth a lot about this, is somewhere there is a number, a threshold, where if your 3-point attempt rate gets below this threshold in 2024, 2025, you just can't win. It's just too hard. Even if you have the best player in the world, it's just too hard. You're just facing too much of a math problem. And Calvin, actually, I was surprised, kind of downplayed that. He's like, of course we'd like it to be higher, but I'm concerned about a whole lot of other things with our team before that. What's your level of, what's your take on this? There's got to be, I just think they have to take more threes. Like, it's not an option to me.
Well, first of all, I agree with you. And the numbers are, the gap is getting wider, right? The teams that are really excelling, namely the Boston Celtics this last year, they're taking an absurd amount of 3-pointers and they're connecting on them. They're building a roster around that concept. Denver has never done that. And I will point out that they didn't do it last year, and their offense was phenomenal, and they were on their way to being
not in the playoffs, though.
But not in the playoffs. And again, some of this I believe has to do with, to generate 3-pointers, especially in Denver's system, you have to get into the paint. And I don't think Jamal Murray was capable of getting into the paint in either of the series last year. So that changed.
And just to be fair,
yeah,
they shot very poorly on the wide open threes they did get. Jokic shot 26% from 3 in the playoffs. Michael Porter was 13 of 40 from 3 against the Wolves after being on fire against the Lakers. So some of their raw production, a little bit of luck, but not much.
But also great defense from Minnesota. I mean, there's a reason Denver thought that matchup was so tough. But when we talk about this upcoming season, I think it is a huge concern for Denver. But the way you solve it, to me, short of adding shooting to the roster, which is obviously the easiest thing, I think Denver's offense is a little stale and has gotten a little predictable in ways that they have guys on the roster that can get more 3-pointers, namely Michael Porter Jr. You add Julian Strawther, who's a guy that Michael Malone, by his own admission, runs more plays for him than anybody on the roster. And I look at this and I say the 2-man game used to be what Denver went to when they needed it. And I think the 2-man game has now become a majority of their identity in a way that's actually reducing the effectiveness of it. Michael Porter is a corner standstill guy. Even KCP last year was go to the corner, stand there, and you would watch him for 20 seconds standing in that same spot. And if the ball found him, it did. If not, it didn't. And I just think Denver can copy from Sacramento, for example, and a handful of other teams, Golden State, obviously in their heyday, of one way you can work the 2-man game into broader options is to get more movement from those guys off ball. I think Denver's going to have to do that if they're going to succeed with Russell Westbrook in their bench unit. But I think more importantly, to make up for their lack of shooting, they're going to have to work in new wrinkles to their offense. And I say wrinkles, it's not a play here or there. It's a new identity, a new, what is it we're asking our guys to do? And I think Michael Porter in particular is a guy that they can move around the perimeter a lot more off ball.
So I just think you nailed it. And Calvin said this to me on the record when we talked. He said that we might have to look at diversifying our offense a little bit more away from that two-man game. It's always going to be the tent pole. It's always going to be the toughest thing to guard. It's always going to be the fallback when things get tight. But the Nuggets noticed last year, the coaches, the front office, everybody, teams, no one has solved it, right? But the smart teams have figured out different counters to it, how to keep the Nuggets a little bit off balance, and how to squeeze a little bit more in the right places so that the best shots and the best options are a little tougher to get. And the number one thing they noticed is, and Minnesota was very smart about this, as were other teams, defense is just selling out to prevent the pocket pass from Murray to Jokic. Like, you are just not going to, that pass is not going to be available. We don't care what else we give up. You are not getting the ball to Jokic 12 feet from the rim or 15 feet from the rim with a runway, with rotating defense, with options. We're just not doing that. And that's not to say that that play is ever going to like not be a part of their offense. It's going to be the tentpole of their offense. But everything, and I was surprised against Minnesota. I thought Minnesota's defense was the moment where Denver was going to have to dig deeper into its offensive bag than ever before. And I wrote in my preview, like, you might have a decoy option going over here on the left side, two guys screening for each other, and then something else going on the right side. And the timing has to be in sync perfectly. And I didn't think we saw enough of that in that series. They almost won the series anyway because Jokic was unbelievable. Game 5 of that series, like, you will not see many finer games than that from an NBA player. But I thought it was interesting that Calvin said that on the record. I think probably the coaching staff would agree to it. And this, to me, what you just said, I think they've kind of not solved, but I think they've settled. The questions were always about defense. Remember, like, right. I think Denver has kind of settled into, this is how we play. We have alternative schemes we can go to. We're going to be somewhere from like the 9th to 12th best defense in the league. That's about what we are. We do these things well and these things not so well. I think the offense is now the more interesting end of the floor to watch, both systematically, as you're talking about, and whatever changes or adjustments or complexities they introduce. Some of that has to be aimed at, we just need to take more threes. We cannot win if the math problem becomes so steep.
But if I have like an overarching critique of Michael Malone, I think he's a great coach. But if I have a critique of him, is I think he is extremely principled, which when going too far, it can be stubborn. And I think that he can lack a little creativity or willingness to make those types of adjustments. And when I look at one of the things, and I've gone back and forth with him in scrums over the years about this, Jamal Murray in every season of his career, except for his rookie season, according to Second Spectrum, is the slowest player to cross half court on average. He walks the ball up. Oftentimes he has to like sprint the last 2 steps to get it above before the clock hits 16 seconds. So he's slow every single time. And I've asked Michael Malone about this. I said, is this a stylistic choice? He says, we're always one of the best offenses. We're going to be one of the best offenses. I'm not concerned about it. But I think this is what we're talking about, is it's effective enough that you don't feel the need to correct it. But is it effective enough to win a championship? Can it actually become an Achilles heel? And I think for Denver, speeding up their pace of play, and one of the reasons I think the team is interested in bringing in a Russell Westbrook is, can this inject just a little bit of an energy and intensity into our play and getting the ball up and down the court? And then lastly, when you talk about, okay, we're going to take away the pocket pass at all costs because Jokic gets the ball on that roll, it's over. Every decision a defense makes comes at the cost of something else. But Denver, because their offense has become a little stale, stagnant, and predictable, there is no penalty for that. And I think that's the real damning thing, is you're talking about a team compromising themselves so much so that you don't hit a roller at the foul line, which again is an extremely compromising place to be rotating to, and you can't punish it. That tells you that your offense lacks some counterpunch or ability to build in a counterpunch that you're going to have to commit to in training camp and work through for the entire season.
This is why basketball is so fascinating, because there are no sort of easy, there are rules and sort of truths of the game, right? But even some of the truths sometimes crack apart when you interrogate them. So one truth is like continuity, universally a good thing.
Right.
Everybody, more continuity is better. There's a place where continuity can blur into staleness if the same team is together for too long, and then it can blur back out of like that same team can find a new wrinkle or find some new juice for whatever reason. But it's just fascinating how that happens where because I do think this team, partly because they were exhausted, partly because I mean you talk to people within the team, and Calvin Booth talked about this with me too. It's hard to summon the same just ferocity and hunger for the second title after a really long playoff run to the first title where everyone's got their chip on their shoulder, they got something to prove. And partly because they've just been together a while, continuity can kind of morph into a semi-staleness. And I think, like you mentioned, Russ, the word speed came up in my conversation with Calvin 15 times. Speed, bringing the ball up, speed cutting in the half court. Christian Brown's a faster cutter than KCP. Julian Strawther moves pretty fast. We want Russ to play fast. We want Jamal Murray to come off screens faster. Like just go full speed around the screen more often than always defaulting to like the bob and weave and the caginess, which he's A+ at. But like sometimes you just got to go. Speed came up a lot. It's really interesting. And the other thing is like some of it is to your point, like I think Michael Porter Jr. just has to shoot more threes. Jamal Murray just has to shoot more threes. Just get more threes up, even if they're not these perfect wide open catch and shoot threes. Like you just got to take more threes. But the speed factor was really interesting. How often that came up.
And I think it's real. It is, and I love that you mentioned the half court because it's not just about playing in transition. It's once you get to the half court. I've always said Jokic is the slowest player physically, but the fastest player mentally. He makes the quickest decisions. So the quicker you're cutting, the quicker the ball is moving, the quicker that the defense has to react. Well, that's increases Jokic's advantage every time you compound that. So to me, that is a big part of it. And by the way, another thing Denver is getting is a little bit more athletic, a little bit bigger. I mean, Christian Brown's a great athlete. Peyton Watson's a great athlete. Julian Strawther has length. He's not a great athlete, but he has a lot of length. And I think that those things actually are a sneaky benefit. And then lastly, you lose a little shooting, but you speed things up. You play a little bit faster, so the athleticism advantage moves more in your favor. But the other thing this team, I think, is going to be able to do at a high level is offensive rebound. Christian Brown's a phenomenal offensive rebounder. Russell Westbrook's a phenomenal, one of the best guard offensive rebounders in NBA history. You've got more size and length. Dario Saric is a very good rebounder actually for his position, rebounds at a higher rate than Aaron Gordon does in terms of just statistically. So you look at this and you say, Denver should be able to clean the glass on both ends. And this used to be a calling card. If you go back to the 2019 and 2020 Nuggets, even the bubble run, they offensive rebounded at the best mark in the NBA. Now they're about league average over the last like 3 years. It's an identity that they've kind of gone away from in favor of more transition defense and spreading it out more. But I think that that's another way where you could say, okay, you lose a little shooting, but you need to increase your pace and your offensive rebounding. And you might be able to make up for some of that, at least in the regular season. In the playoffs, a team might be able to take advantage of it. But I think that that's an identity they're going to have to shift to.
Well, yeah, offensive rebounding has been a big part of their identity off and on. I think they were top 5 again last year or something close to it. And I think one of the reasons their offense slumped in the playoffs was they came across 2 of the 10 best defensive rebounding teams in the league, and they just couldn't get offensive rebounds. But another thing offensive rebounds and rim pressure and other of these things, speed lead to athleticism, ferocity, is free throws. And I think the Nuggets are keenly aware that, okay, we're never going to be even an average 3-point shooting team in terms of volume. Like we're just, that part of the math is going to be against us in a lot of matchups. That's fine. We have all sorts of other ways to compensate for that, including being the best mid-range team in the league and the best floater team in the league and all of that. We do need to get the free throws up to average. And we can't be a bottom 5 free throw team and a bottom 1 3-point attempt team. And I think that's part of the hope. That said, man, I don't have a lot of high hopes for the Russell Westbrook experiment. Do you?
It's more, this is the first move. The Nuggets have been so tough, but for 9 years, they've been climbing. It just feels like it's been a linear, we're moving upwards. This is the first one that feels like it has more downside than upside. So at this moment, there's definitely avenues where I see it working out. They're more like intangible avenues. And I'll give you an example. You mentioned there was Denver maybe didn't have the same motivation. Jamal Murray mentioned this, by the way, after the season, that it was hard this year because the 82 game season, what did it really mean? They kind of know what really matters and what have you. I think bringing in a veteran player that's beloved and has not won might inject some life back into the roster a little bit. Because I remember when Jokic won in 2023, he said, yeah, I really wanted for Jeff. Jeff and Ish. These guys have been in the league for 20 years and they never won one. I wanted that. I think that Westbrook might bring some of that enthusiasm, and then also just shifting your identity. I think Denver last year was again stale. It felt like a repeat of the same season, and I think it got stale. This year, if you are bringing in new guys and changing your identity, it might keep things fresh enough to re-energize and make this less monotonous.
So I was 1,000% against the Clippers acquiring Russ. I told people at the Clippers that, and they were like, "We're doing it anyway. We don't care what you think. We think it's going to work." And we, not that they would care what I think. We were just shooting the breeze. And for a while it worked, and I ate crow. Like, Russ was buying into a role off the bench, rebounding like all hell, pretty judicious with his shot selection. They found ways around his complete lack of spacing away from the ball. And I was like, I guess this is going to work. I mean, all along I had this nagging feeling like I just don't really trust this. And then the playoffs came along, and I don't know how much of that Clippers Mavs series you caught, probably all of it, because you're doing all NBA wide stuff now. It's hard to play worse in a playoff series for a high level on ball player than Russell Westbrook did in that series on both ends of the floor. And I was like, oh my God, he shot 13 of 50 in that series, 11 turnovers, 10 assists. It was just on tilt the entire series. And I mentioned that not to harp on it, but to say this. Russell Westbrook is a backup now. He's going to be a backup on this team. And I think he's the kind of backup where, to your point, there are slices of games and slices of the Nuggets style and slices of their rotation where you can fit him in and think, that makes sense. That works. There are also going to be games and weeks when it just goes completely haywire. And I think he's at the point in his career when during those games and weeks, you just have to not play him or reduce his minutes to the point where he's a real bit player. The Clippers didn't really do that. The Nuggets may conclude we don't really even have the depth to do that because they don't have another backup point guard. They'd kind of have to do it by committee. But I think, I mean, the way he played in that Mavs series merited that kind of treatment. And the response to that is, you know, you just don't know how he's going to respond to something like that. You don't know how he's going to respond to being like coming to Denver and like, oh yeah, I'm a complete, there's no chance I'm going to start. Like, I should start, blah, blah. I don't know. You just don't know.
Right. I think those concerns are all extremely valid, especially just the note about the slumps that he gets into, because he is not a guy that scales his game down. Like, okay, my shot's not working, let me try something else. He's a guy that just will keep taking them. I think that the playoff rotation for Denver, Yoke's on the court for all but 6 minutes in a playoff series, and I think he is the big factor for that. Playing alongside Jokic opens up the paint. You could play him more with Murray, more with Michael Porter. You might be able to. I'm giving you the optimistic spin here, but you might be able.
No, I'm not totally pessimistic. I just have been sort of trained. I mean, Russ has been on all these teams in all these years. Like, it doesn't seem to end well.
Yeah, and look, it is the meme, right? But it might work for us, and that's what Denver's doing here. Is that this time it might work? But I do think there is a reason to look at his teams in Oklahoma City, his teams in Houston, his teams in both LA places, and say Denver plays a completely different brand of basketball, one that he's never proven to be able to do. But if he is able to translate his game to fit into that system, I do think it's different than, okay, we just got 4 spacers or 3 spacers in a roller, and now we're all just kind of driving and kicking to each other, which is what he's played in. So there's reason for it to work out. And I do think that more than anything, because, you know, the reports have been that Jokic was one of the people that said, hey, I really like Russ. I want to play him. We need what he brings to our team. We need that here. And I think one of the things that Denver desperately needs is one of the things Bruce brought was intensity every single night, every single practice, every single quarter. And Denver lacks that. We're not that far removed from Richard Jefferson saying it's the quietest locker room he's ever been a part of. Nobody talks, nobody says anything. And I think Westbrook will bring an every game, 82 game mentality to the Nuggets that they desperately need. And if that translates to the playoffs, if they find a way to make the on-court stuff work, I do think that there's some positive upside to him coming here.
All right, so I'll end with the same challenge I gave Tim MacMahon before. It's July 26th. Markkanen unsettled, Ingram unsettled, a little bit of stuff unsettled in the West. Who would you pick today to make the finals out of the West?
Right now, I would pick the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think that they're the most complete team. The concern is, of course, just when a team hasn't done it before and they're young, you think, can they do it? But when you look at what they were good at and what they were weak at last year, they doubled down on some of the things they were good at. They were good at perimeter containment last year, and they add Alex Caruso now. If you just talk about who you're going to have to stop, including Denver, well, we just saw Jamal Murray struggle with a 3-headed monster of Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Well, now you have Dort, Wallace, and Caruso to throw at him. That's equal, in my opinion, in terms of how you can harass an on-ball pick-and-roll player. And then now you have the best defense anybody's ever come up with against Jokic, which is a large-bodied center in Hartenstein, who, by the way, knows and admires his game and has tried to mold his game after Jokic, and a great rim-protecting four that can sag off of Aaron Gordon and Chet Holmgren. That he already had 9 blocks against Denver once, playing that role, sagging off of Aaron Gordon. And now you have a true center to play alongside him. So I look at that team and I just say they have fewer weaknesses than they did last year when they were the number 1 seed. They're more mature. They're more experienced. And I think they're the best team in the West.
Now, I want to be clear. This is not my finals pick. It's July 26th. This is not your finals pick. But I also defaulted to Oklahoma City for now. I think they will be the number 1 seed if they stay healthy. I think they learned some stuff in the playoffs last year, including they need a little bit more kind of zest and playmaking in their offense around SGA. And they obviously addressed a bunch of needs in size and shooting and defense and depth. I think they are the best, most plausible answer among several plausible answers for now. My general point about Denver is we could have an argument over what team has the most pressure, the highest stakes on this season. You could argue for the Bucks, could argue for the Sixers. I think Denver has a pretty plausible argument after coming up a round or 2 short of what they expected in their bid for a repeat after the second straight offseason in which a critical player left. And Bruce Brown, there was just nothing they could do about Bruce Brown. The offer from Indiana was just too big. And with a 3-time MVP at age 29 and all the flack they took about the apron and all of this, I think Denver has as much at stake as, if not more, than any other team in the league in the outcome of this particular 24-25 season. I also think they remain an inner circle title contender, and that the attention on the free agency departures, I think the consensus is a hair too low on the Nuggets and their championship outlook in 24-25. If Jokic is healthy and Murray is healthy and they make some adjustments and 1 or 2 of the young kids pops even a little bit, I just would never sleep on Jokic in his prime ever. And we may get to September when I make my real pick. It may very well be Denver. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, and that's exactly how I feel about it. And I would add Murray to this. Now, Murray's in a really weird spot because he underperformed in these playoffs and he missed 23 games last year. But it's really when Murray and Jokic are healthy, they win 80% of their games. Just full stop. Forget everything else, all the other moving parts. And that goes back to playoffs, by the way, as well. So I tend to agree that their floor is higher than I think people are kind of giving credit for just because of having Murray and Jokic. But they're more volatile than they've been in any of the healthy Murray Jokic seasons.
Adam Morris, just must listen podcast with Tim Legler. Legs, you stole legs from us, stole legs from me. You know the NBA better. Nobody knows the Nuggets better. Thank you for lending us more of your time. I hope to see you soon, my friend.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.
All right. Last, but definitely not least, never least, one of the best in the business from The Athletic, Minnesota expert, Timberwolves beat writer, Jon Krawczynski. How are you?
I'm good, Zach. Just enjoying a little bit of downtime here and soaking it up, but a shorter off season than I'm used to having. So got to adjust to that now, covering a team that's actually pretty good.
How are the Twins?
They're good. They're kind of they're in the wild card race. They're about 4.5 out in the division. Cleveland's had a really good season, so they're in the mix. I'll say that, but I don't know that they're primed for a deep run or anything like that.
Are there still Homer hankies? Is that still a thing?
When the playoffs come out, yeah, we dust those things off and recycle them and do them again. It's not the same though when you're not in the Metrodome and you got the white going against the white roof and you're really messing with the opposing outfielders and stuff. Not quite the same, but we'll still bring those things out. It's tradition.
I have one somewhere. I have a terrible towel and a Homer hanky, among other old school things that you would wave.
87, okay. 91. Do you know which one it was? Which version?
I think it's 87 because my parents had friends who lived in Minneapolis at the time, and I think they sent us a few during that playoff run. They won the World Series that year, right?
They did. Yeah.
Cardinals. Who'd they beat in the World Series?
Beat the Cardinals in 7 games in 1987. Yep. Great series.
Little 10-year-old Zach Lowe hated the St. Louis Cardinals, hated them. As a Mets fan, just they were public enemy. John Tudor was public enemy number one. To this day, I don't know if John Tudor is still alive or not, but if I saw his face, something in my soul would get angry. All right, I want to have you on because as I said to Adam and Tim, I'm polling everyone I meet with and talk to with one question, and the question is: as of today, July 26th. Who would you pick to come out of the finals in the West? Let's pretend Markkanen stays where he is, Ingram stays where he is, nothing seismic happens. Who would you pick? And as I told Tim, people begin to answer like confidently, and then as if this were a year ago, and everyone would say Denver, the defending champion Denver Nuggets. And some people answer confidently. Most of those people pick the Thunder, but most people begin to answer confidently, and then go through this internal monologue where they talk themselves into and out of one team after another. And part of that internal monologue tends to be, after talking about the Nuggets and maybe the Thunder, wait a second, why isn't it just Minnesota? Like, they just beat Denver. They made the conference finals. Games 1 and 2 of that series, when it all kind of fell apart for them, were complete down to the wire nail biters that could have gone either way. Anthony Edwards is this ascendant superstar who averaged 28 points a game on 48% shooting in the playoffs. Cat, a little up or down, but kind of exercised some demons along the way, was essential in beating the Nuggets, which was like a monster achievement. Continuity, I mean, Kyle Anderson's the only rotation player that left. It's unclear who's going to fill his minutes. 2 interesting rookies, and Rob Dillingham, big trade to get him, Terrence Shannon Jr. So I would ask you, like, why isn't it just the Wolves? What questions does this team have to answer to vault a little higher in this conversation? Because on paper, they maybe should be more people's pick, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that if you want to see why not, I still do think, even despite the success that they had last year, when you look at 2 of their main pieces, Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns, both have very big detractors around the league, fairly or unfairly. I think that those are 2 players that typically get a lot of criticism and derision, especially when it comes to the playoffs. Like you said, Cat played very, very well in the first 2 series against Phoenix and Denver. Against Dallas, he did not shoot the ball very well, so that kind of, I think, leaves people with a different kind of taste in their mouths coming out of that series.
38% in that series, 24% on threes.
Yep, and then you see also some of the difficulty that the Wolves had defensively against Luka and Kyrie with Rudy on the floor. Kind of brings out some of those things, even though I think that Rudy Gobert absolutely deserved Defensive Player of the Year last year. I thought he was terrific for most of the season, and defensively they were a great team that just ran into a bit of a bad matchup. So yeah, I think that would probably be my inclination as to why there remain doubters. That said, when you look at the composition of this team, the continuity, the coaching, the front office leadership, the way that the chemistry of this team works together, and some of the pieces that they did add in the offseason with Dillingham, with Shannon, Joe Ingles, kind of a sneaky little piece that will come in and I think be very valuable for them. I think they have a real good chance, and it really all comes down to where Anthony Edwards is coming out of this Olympic experience for him. And if he has one more leap left in him, which I believe he does, then I think anything is on the table for this team.
I have zero doubt that Anthony Edwards has another leap in him and that it will come soon. Zero. He averaged 6.5 assists a game in the playoffs, and I think even more, like 7 and change against Dallas in what was a competitive gentleman's sweep. I think that's where the leap is going to come. Not that he's going to average 8-9 assists a game, but just in the substance of his playmaking, as you would expect from a 22. Is he 23 yet? I don't know, 22, whatever he is. Yeah. As you would expect from a player that age on this stage, that's going to be one of the last parts of his game to really, really, really mature. And defensively, I think it's just a matter of dialing in a little bit more away from the ball. He buys in. He wants to be a good defender. He's a monster on the ball. I think another leap is coming. But I will ask you, like, I was going through my notes from the Wolves Nuggets and Wolves Mavs series earlier today, and I remember, and then it jogged my memory that he looked tired particularly against the Mavs. He looked tired. Like what did he ever address that? Like, is it just, and it's new, like this is a longer season, longer playoff run, more responsibility. Did he address that? Is it, I don't even think it's something that needs to be corrected. I don't know how you correct it, but what did he say about that?
Yeah, he and many of the Timberwolves after they lose to Dallas, it was the question was, what the heck happened? You just beat the defending champions in 7 games, that terrific comeback on the road in Game 7 in Denver, and then all of a sudden Dallas does. It's a gentleman's sweep. Yes, some of the games were very close, especially early, but it was very clear that Dallas was the much better team in that series, deserved to win, and really kind of surprised, I think, people with the way that they handled the Timberwolves. So what exactly happened? And I think that listening to Anthony Edwards, one of the first things that he said in the post-mortem of it was, I got to be in better shape coming in next year. I've got, what we understood. Naz Reid said the same thing. Several players who were in this position for the first time said, we did not fully understand the grind of the playoffs and what it takes physically to get through it. They did run out of gas against Dallas in some ways. And honestly, Zach, I really believe this in being there for Game 7 and being through that series. When the Wolves won Game 7 against Denver, because of the inexperience, I think they thought they climbed the mountain. We've done the hardest thing. We came back from 20 down. We beat the champs on the road. Now we're going to handle Dallas, no problem. We're going to go to the finals. What they came to realize is we were only halfway through this playoff run by doing that. And I just think that you cannot prepare for that until you're in it. And across the board, most of the guys that outside of Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert said, we did run out of gas. We just have to come in better shape and be ready for the absolute physical toll that it takes on you. I think that surprised a lot of guys, including Anthony Edwards, in that Western Conference Finals.
Well, and playing against Jokic and a team like Denver is not only physically draining, it's mentally draining.
Yes.
Now they did sweep Phoenix, because I was going to say, it does highlight the importance of a team like what Boston did, which is just taking care of business in all these series fast. And the West just does not often afford you the luxury of having even one easy series. They were fortunate to have one easy one against Phoenix last year. That's just reality. And your second round series is going to be like this almost every year. You mentioned Kat and Rudy. I actually think that's what it comes down to. I just think there's this sort of lingering trust factor that people have. Like, do I really trust these guys on the biggest stage? Like, Rudy, like, damn, whatever. Kat's kind of goofy, and his shot, he's still, like, to his credit, his turnovers went down. That was a playoff weak spot for him. His fouls went down for the most part. Although I did remember he committed a foul on the opening jump ball of the Nuggets series. I was like, oh boy, here we go.
Yeah.
But it's just he does. There's just a whole subset of his offensive game that is harder for him to access playing against a paint bound center like Gobert. It's always going to be not awkward, but just a thing. And they made up for it by being the best defensive team in the league. I don't see any reason why their defense would slip. And when we talk about leaps, people don't talk about him in this sense because he's not going to be a star player. But I think Jaden McDaniels has another level to get to, particularly on offense. He's very young. He's the fifth option. Whether it's shooting a little bit more off the bounce creation against closeouts, like I think improvement from him is baked into it. He's the starting lineup will be the same: Conley, Ant, McDaniels, Cat, Gobert. Then you get to your 7th and 8th guys, which are pretty much as good as anybody's 7 and 8 in the league if Alexander Walker has another good year. And then you have Naz Reid, the 6th man of the year. He did win, right? Naz Reid won 6th man of the year.
Yep. Sure.
After that is where I get a little bit nervous, because I don't know who the 8th guy on the team is. Could be one of the rookies. You could talk me into Joe Ingles. He really didn't do much for the Magic last year. The Magic were deep. After that, like, am I forgetting something? I mean, they just signed BJ Dozier, who's a Tim Connolly favorite from Denver. You have the kids who didn't play last year, who are going to be second-year guys this year. Like, that makes me a little nervous. Every team is one injury away from a problem. That makes me a little nervous. What's your take on 8th spots 8 to the end.
Yeah, right now the plan is I understand your nervousness, Zach. But the plan right now and the way that this roster has been constructed is that Rob Dillingham is going to be that guy. That he is really the only other point guard on the roster behind Mike Conley. You have Anthony Edwards can do it. You have Nickeil Alexander-Walker can do it. Joe Ingles could even do it in a pinch. But really, they've set this up. They did not re-sign Monte Morris. They did not bring back a veteran guy as some sort of safety blanket because they want Rob Dillingham.
Jordan McLaughlin, he's gone too.
Yep, they did not bring him back. Yep. So they could have brought someone like that in or another option on a minimum deal as sort of a safety blanket, but they don't want that right now. They want Rob Dillingham to just play. And there are going to be nights where he struggles. The size is going to be an issue early, probably as he figures that out. But they believe that he brings something to the table that they absolutely desperately needed last year as a creator, bucket getter, kind of lob thrower off of the bench that they just didn't have against Dallas. They ran out of bullets in the chamber when it was really only Ant that was creating for himself in that series and couldn't keep up with Luka and Kyrie that way. So they want Dillingham to be that guy. And if that means that he struggles early, if that means that even a couple of games get lost because he's so young and he's learning this, they want it so at the end of the season, it's him. I think you will see Shannon as well, who is 24 years old. Like, he is a man, like he's a grown man. And I think he'll be in the mix for that as well. Minot, I'm not so sure about. Leonard Miller is a big, so I don't see there's much room for him in the rotation right now. Same with Garza. So I really think that in a perfect world, over the first few months of the season, they go through the bumps in the road that they're going to expect from Rob Dillingham, but there are still going to be those nights where he comes in and he hits 4 threes in 19 minutes and really energizes the bench in a way that they did not have last year. And then he's prepared going into the playoffs to be that kind of energy guy off of the bench. So it's set up that way. Can they keep with it and can they be disciplined enough to just stay with it even if there's some struggles early? That will be a question mark to see if Chris Finch and those guys can do that, but that's the way this is set up right now.
Chris Finch is healthy. We should mention that. The coach is going to be healthy.
He is walking around. I've seen it. I've confirmed it. He's the crutches are gone, all of that, and I think he's off all the painkillers and he's back at it. So he'll be ready to go for training camp.
It's funny as you go through the pressure that's on Dillingham and the role they're going to hope that he wins. You know, in most cases, 7 guys I trust, 3 of them are centers, would be a recipe to not make me feel great about the team. But I really trust all 7 of these guys. I trust their chemistry together. And every iteration of 2 bigs, of Kat, Rudy, and Naz worked really well last year. I do wonder if part of their coaching staff dreams that they had a little bit more ability to get to lineups where they only played one of them. Like, they probably don't, because 2 of their 3 best players are among that crew, as is the 6th man of the year. It would just be a little interesting to have kind of another look. Maybe Naz is such a different kind of player that they have another look, and Rudy's his own kind of player. But I like this team. I think they should be right in that conversation. Obviously, I like this team. It is a big year for them, though, because it was their first series win since KG. It's been a franchise that I don't need to tell you has had a lot of ups and downs, a lot of false starts, a lot of turmoil. This doesn't feel like a false start because they kind of step by step with Gobert have been, they get Gobert, they face the Nuggets in the first round. They acquit themselves pretty well despite some major injuries to Naz Reid and McDaniels. They come back next season with another year of chemistry. They have the best defense in the league, win 2 playoff rounds. It feels like sustainable. It feels like progress. They kind of have to make it sustainable, and a step back would be not that you're guaranteed to make the conference finals or anything, but qualitatively some slippage given the ownership situation and the financial situation would raise some interesting questions. Mostly I just think inevitably around Cat. And I still get asked about Cat all the time. Are the Knicks interested in Cat? I keep hearing the Knicks are interested in Cat. Is this team interested in Cat? Is that team interested in Cat? Would they trade Cat for Julius Randle and this, that, and the other thing? And I'm like, I keep hearing that the Wolves are not trading Cat. That the best way someone put it to me was, if they had lost in the first round, this is a totally different conversation. They got to the conference finals. Now, if they get to the trade deadline and they're 2 games over 500, I don't know what that means, but I'm expecting this team to be as is going into the season. I'm expecting them to be really good. And then the playoffs come, and maybe that's what decides it. But these questions are still out there, but their playoff performance kind of pushed them out a bit, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Zach. I do believe firmly that if they had flamed out against Phoenix in the first round last playoffs, that they would have looked very hard at trading Karl-Anthony Towns, both for financial reasons and for maybe believing in performance reasons as well. Cat played very well against Phoenix. He was one of the major keys to beating Jokic. Like that's undisputable. Like they have no one else that really guards Jokic, and Cat made him work and did the best that he could, and really did a nice job there against Denver, and
shot 50-40 almost.
Yeah,
in that
exactly.
Series.
Yep. And you're going to have to face Jokic again. I know, some people are wondering if Denver's a little bit down. You still have to factor in, you're going to have to go through Denver at some point, probably in the playoffs. And so you need Karl-Anthony Towns in that situation. Because they made it to the Western Conference Finals and because they had so much success, there was pressure to bring it back the way that it was. I don't believe that they had to run it back exactly as they have. But the edict that I understand was put down to Tim Connolly from above was that I'm not against the ownership, either side, both Alex Rodriguez and Mark Laurie, Glenn Taylor, was not against a trade of players, Cat or others, in and of itself, but that it had to be one, if a deal was made, it had to be one that they thought was going to improve their chances of winning the West. It was not going to be made for financial reasons yet in this iteration this summer. And there was nothing out there for Cat, for Nas, for Jaden McDaniels, for anyone in the core that they looked at and said, if we make this deal, it's going to give us a better chance of winning the Western Conference. So they are going into this season the way that it is, with this structure as it is. But you're right. If they stumble, if there are injuries and it's not working, if it's a Sacramento thing where you can't go that extra tick up in a very improved conference, anything is on the table mid-season or certainly at the end of next season if there is a step back. But right now, there's just a lot of belief in continuity, and this organization has not had continuity ever for decades. And so now they've started to put together continuity with Tim Connolly, with Chris Finch, with this roster, and they think that is the beneficial thing for them going forward. Tim Connolly has always been kind of a continuity guy. Like he wants to keep things together if it's working. And so I anticipate that's going to be the case going into the start of next season.
Well, he himself, what did he do? He tacked one more year onto his contract or something?
Yeah, no, he actually pushed. So he had a buyout or an opt-out this summer.
And he pushed it a year.
And he pushed it back a year. So, yep, he wants to see how the ownership situation flushes out. But yeah, he pushed it back 1 year, and we'll revisit that next season after all the ownership stuff shakes out.
Have fun with that, by the way.
So
just like, if this is a roster, this is the team, continuity, we kind of know how they play, or how they at least played last season in terms of style and substance. What's the most interesting basketball subplot to you? Forget Dillingham. Like, we know Dillingham. How is he ready? Is he not? Is there something about this roster and how it might adapt, or something that needs to get better at, or something you're worried it'll get worse at? Like, what's an interesting subplot for a team that's going to be largely the same?
Yeah, the messaging that to me that is super interesting that came out right at the end of the season was that last year at this time, after the Rudy Gobert experiment did not really work in year one, or was underwhelming, let's just say, in year one, there was a concerted effort internally with the coaching staff, with the front office, and with the players to say, we are fully committing to being a defense first team. And the way that this team is going to win games with Rudy Gobert on the roster is we're going to change things up defensively. Hey, Rudy, we also need you to compromise a little bit as well, and some of your time-honored things, and meet us in the middle with it. And we're going to put together a defense and a focus on defense that is going to carry us. And it worked out very well. Number one defense in the league all year long. Get to the Western Conference Finals. That's great. But when the reflection of what they were missing going into this summer, all of the focus is, how do we increase the offense? Because they were number one in offense, number one in defense, number 17 in offense. That's just not good enough. And so when it came down to Dallas, it was, we do not have enough offense to keep up with some of these guys. We have to generate more transition opportunities. We need more guys who can create their own shot. And we just have to be up into the top 10 somehow offensively to give ourselves the chance of going to the finals. That's the belief here. And so that's why they were so aggressive going and getting Dillingham. That's why Joe Ingles is coming in and Kyle Anderson is leaving. Is they are looking for ways. Jaden McDaniels, you hit on it, is going to have to make a leap offensively. And he looked really good in the playoffs, I think, offensively. Like, we had a really good playoffs. So if he can build on that, if Ant can build on what he's doing, they have to find a way to get into the top 10 offensively. And that's what all of the focus has been on this summer and will continue to be on in training camp, is making changes, tweaks to the scheme, into the philosophy and the system, and also injecting Shannon, Dillingham, and Ingles into this, and hoping that helps to kind of give this thing the boost that it needs, so that in matchups where the number one defense just doesn't have as much teeth, that they have another way to win games.
Interesting. Well, we'll see how it works, but the West is going to be really fun next year, up and down the conference. It's going to be really interesting. Jon Krawczynski, you're going to be chronicling it all from the Timberwolves perspective on the Timberwolves beat. Nobody does it better. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all your time this year. I hope to see you soon. Hopefully you get a little downtime. Enjoy the Olympics. Big Olympics for the Minnesota Timberwolves. You know, we got how many? We got at least 3.
You got Rudy, you got Ant, you got Ingles, and you got Nickeil Alexander-Walker.
I forgot Ingles.
Yep, so you got 4 of them out there. So yeah, the Wolves are taking over the world as usual. So
thank you, John. Be well.
Appreciate it, Zach. Thank you.